The Long Road by Wolfland. It wasn't long before the ashy landscape of Route 113 was replaced by the rust-colored rocks of nearby Mount Chimney. Before Stephen could wonder exactly why Skarmory had carried him here, he was dropped unceremoniously to the ground, where he tumbled to a halt. Two steely talons came to rest several yards away, and Stephen willed his limbs to obey as he tried to rise from his less than graceful landing. By the time he'd found his feet, Skarmory had already wheeled around and caught him in its fiery glare. With a menacing screech, Skarmory unfurled its wings in a threatening display, and Stephen backpedaled as far as he could before he made contact with a large boulder blocking his retreat. The bird was no less upset than it had been the previous day, and now it finally had managed to isolate the encounter to just the two of them, trainer and wild Pokemon, or as Stephen was sure Skarmory saw it, predator and prey. Except that Stephen wasn't alone. Skarmory may have thwarted Metang by dragging him up to the top of Mount Chimney, but he still had 4 other Pokemon by his side that were willing and able to fight. And yet, when his hand flew to his belt, he was met with nothing but a swath of fabric and a bulging pouch of ash. The glassblower's smock hung low and snug over his hips, and to Stephen's dismay, completely blocked access to his Pokeballs. But Skarmory wasn't interested in waiting, and it shrieked with malicious glee before racing towards its foe, wings raised to attack. Stephen's eyes widened in realization as the distance between them closed in a matter of moments. Skarmory chose such a tiny ledge on purpose. It was tired of chasing Stephen all over the expanses of Route 113, so it selected a smaller battleground this time. In a panic, Stephen threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding Skarmory's blades as they swooshed overhead. Sparks danced when 4 neat gouges were cleaved into the rock that was pressed against Stephen's back mere seconds prior. However, Stephen's evasive maneuver didn't allow him to get away unscathed, and he landed hard on his stomach, knocking the wind out of himself. Clutching his ribs to try to recover his breath, his hand found something he had forgotten about in his panic. The Pokeballs that the glassblower had given him that morning. Quickly rolling on his side, Stephen dug his hand into the pocket of his smock to retrieve a ball. But Skarmory was already looming over him, and with a vicious slash, it caught Stephen across the back with 2 of its bladed feathers. Somehow, Stephen managed to roll away from the brunt of the attack, leaving only shallow cuts in its wake. But that didn't mean it hurt any less, and Stephen bit back a cry as the Pokeball fell from his hand. There was no time to retrieve it, as Stephen rolled further out of Skarmory's attack range, and the bird's second swing found only empty air. Recovering from its missed strike, Skarmory was a bit slow in tracking Stephen's movements, and Stephen seized his chance. Digging one hand into the soot sack at his side, he grabbed a handful of ash and hurled it at Skarmory's face. The ash exploded in a thick cloud, and Skarmory squawked as its eyes and mouth filled with soot. Teeth grit as he scrambled to his feet, Stephen reached back into his front pocket to retrieve another empty Pokeball. As he withdrew his hand, he looked on in surprise. No way! The Ultra Ball's black and golden pattern gleamed in the sunlight, and Stephen gaped at the glassblower's generosity. He didn't have long to gape though, as Skarmory quickly recovered from Stephen's blinding attack and was bearing down on him again. Stumbling backward to avoid Skarmory's first slice, Stephen waited until he saw Skarmory wind up for another swing, and he threw the Ultra Ball. Skarmory's eyes went wide with a dismayed caw as the ball struck it straight in the chest. With a flash of light, the Ultra Ball snapped shut and clattered to the ground. 1 shake. 2 shakes. Stephen held his breath, unable to tear his gaze away. In a triumphant burst, the Ultra Ball split open, and Skarmory stood before him once more, head drooping and panting with effort, but standing there nonetheless. Stephen's heart sunk as he watched the two broken halves of the Ultra Ball rock back and forth on the ground. After so many battles, how was Skarmory able to break free from such a high-caliber Pokeball? His hands scrabbled at the fabric across his hips, trying to again reach his partners, while Skarmory recovered from its latest escape. If he could just land an attack or two, Skarmory would be down for the count. But the Smock was still too snug, and Skarmory already had caught its breath. Abandoning any hope of taking it out in battle, Stephen braced himself as Skarmory lunged. Backpedaling out of range, Stephen prepared himself to duck under another of Skarmory's swings, but it too had changed tactics. A talon flashed forward, catching Stephen by the ankle. With his leg now trapped in Skarmory's grasp, his momentum toppled him over backward with a shout of surprise. A second talon slammed to the dirt, coming up empty as Stephen wrenched his arm out of the way at the last second. He frantically dug into his pocket, not daring to look away from the deadly bird that leered down at him. His hand barely closed around his last resort when a razor-sharp beak whipped forward and plunged straight for his throat. In one smooth motion, Stephen withdrew the empty Pokeball and slammed it into the side of Skarmory's leg, button first. The iron grip on his ankle vanished in a swirl of red light, and Stephen dropped the Pokeball as it snapped shut, hand flying to his neck to ward off the ghost of a blow that had never landed. The rattling of the Pokeball drew his eye, and with a sad realization that it was only a regular ball, Stephen scooted away from it before it inevitably burst open. But one shake turned into two, and two into three, and then silence. Using one of the nearby rocks to drag himself to his feet, Stephen stared in stunned disbelief at the sealed Pokeball that lay on the ground. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Skarmory was caught. But for some reason, Stephen was still hesitant to claim his prize. As he stood watching the Pokeball in silence, a breeze rolled up the mountain, and the cold air snuck through the tears in the back of the Smock. He shivered as the fresh cut stung, and then suddenly he grew angry. Twisting and turning, he finally grasped the kinch holding the Smock on, and yanked the offending garment off. Collected soot be damned. As he tossed the Smock to the ground in a puff of ash, he let out a sigh of relief. Finally, his hand found the familiar shape of his partner's at his belt, and his rapid heartbeat calmed just a bit. Bolstered by the knowledge that his Pokémon were finally able to help him, it was time to deal with his newest teammate. Still not totally trusting the Pokeball to hold its furious contents, Stephen hesitantly edged forward until he was within reach. With a cautious nudge, he prodded the Pokeball with his foot, careful to avoid the button lest he release another round of fury upon himself. When the ball didn't burst open at the slightest touch, he leaned down and plucked it from the ground, wincing as the wounds across his back reminded him of just what it took to catch his sixth and final Pokémon. And at the thought, Stephen froze. He had gone after Skarmory with the intent of asking it to join his team and fly around Hoenn on its back. So far, it had done a marvelous job in proving its worth as a Pokémon transport. It had carried him to Mount Chimney with no problem. Yet there was no way he would trust Skarmory to agree to carry him back down the mountain. Stephen shook his head in disbelief at his current dilemma. He was finally in possession of a flying Pokémon, except it would only fly him around with the intent of killing him when they landed. How in the world was he going to get down from Mount Chimney?